Welcome to the MetaView podcast. Hear these non-fungible conversations. They will yield you great knowledge and perspective. But beware, they might also make your brain go boom. So watch your step, because this rabbit hole goes deep. Good luck and have fun.
Welcome, Xavier and Leen. We found each other over Twitter. I don't know who followed who first, but I remember seeing your profile and thinking, okay, this guy seems like a perfect fit because you're involved in a bunch of cool projects, like from DAO Brussels to All for Climate, which are kind of some of the main things that we're not focusing specifically on climate, but yeah, trying to find this middle ground between crypto, DAOs, and doing good. And yeah, you seem like a perfect fit. You both want to say more about yourself before we get into the projects?
Sure. All right, maybe I can start.
All right, go.
So my name is Leen. I'm Flemish. I spent most of my life in Antwerp and recently moved to Brussels. I have a background in higher education, but I trained as a facilitator in deep democracy. About 5 years ago, I got very much inspired by deep democracy, and I focused on citizen participation, active citizenship. How can citizens take ownership again over their city, where they live? And we started reinventing politics from a very participative and transparent way. And then a couple of years ago, I moved to Brussels and I met Xavier, and we were very aligned on our views on how to reshape the city and how to get more citizens involved in reshaping and reimagining the life we live in cities. I think that's in short what brought us together.
And I'm Xavier. I'm originally from Belgium, French-speaking part, and actually lived for the past 10 years or so in the US, mostly in San Francisco. I'm an engineer by trade, and I moved to San Francisco in 2009 to start a startup, because back in the days, the word was not in the vocabulary in Europe. We're talking about SMEs. And so I moved there to San Francisco, and it was a very inspiring time. It felt like the Renaissance, like Florence during the Renaissance, where it was a dark age, economic turmoil in the rest of the world because of the economic crisis in 2008. But in San Francisco, there was this kind of energy where the Medicis, where the angel investors and VCs would basically give you money to think, imagine the future without having to worry about the state of the world today. And so I spent 7 years there. I did a startup. We sold it, then moved to New York City. Started another company called Open Collective that is still around. And then just a few years ago, 3 years ago, moved to Brussels, where I met Leen, and got pretty involved with all the movements for the climate. I realized that, wow, what a big problem it has become, and what a big challenge that we have to face that we cannot ignore anymore. And so I wanted to try to find ways, how can I contribute as an entrepreneur, as a technologist, to solving this problem of the climate emergency and help the community? You know, it's all this concept of the ikigai, right? This intersection, finding the intersection between what you are good at, what you love doing, what the world needs, and also like what the world is willing to pay for. And so, so that's basically why in the last couple of years, we've been doing, especially with COVID, actually, we've been doing more and more like local activism in our own streets. We started a citizen garden just in front of our garage door because we don't have a car. And so we thought that, hey, this space is empty. Why don't we use it to bring nature back and invite neighbors to co-create that together and plant some seeds?
Well, the idea also came from, we were both active in Extinction Rebellion, being arrested a couple of times. And we felt all the time that we were asking governments, like people that we give the power to make a change. whereas the change can actually happen right at your doorstep. And since we don't have a garden and we have a garage but no car, we thought, like, why not really start at our doorstep and just put a tiny garden there that we can grow into a community garden while we are all stuck at home in a lockdown in the COVID times. So, and that's, yeah, I think that's how we made an entry in the neighborhood, started there, right?
And that was beautiful because, you know, during the lockdown, everything was to a stop, to a standstill, but nature was growing literally in this little garden that people could just walk in front. And that really enabled us to start meeting neighbors, create new connections, recreate community in our own street. And then there was a whole story you can follow on Twitter, actually, because we tweeted along the way, sharing all of those plants growing and the neighbors. And at some point we woke up and it was gone because the city took it away because we didn't have permission to do that. And it was such an interesting story to see the polarity and the friction between kind of the old world with all of their old rules that prioritize car traffic, that prioritize efficiency, and actually removes opportunities for people to meet, to recreate community. And then this new world where we actually want to reclaim the space, recreate connections.
It's funny how, like, 1 square meter of wood and some soil and a couple of plants, actually in a very chaotic, not really organized way, could change into a debate on how to use the public space. And why do we allow all those metal boxes to take the space in our streets, where our kids at that very moment were stuck inside and could not go out and play a bit of, you know, football or whatever, just to get out of the house in the lockdown. There was no car passing anyway. So this tiny garden opened up this whole debate of how to use the public space and how can we rethink our cities and claiming it back, that space, questioning it. And then, of course, it got into a fight with prehistoric government here in the commune of Skarbeek, who is really old school and favors cars. But we see that this tiny action made such a big impact on the neighbors, right? Everybody, we got to know everybody. We had our coffee every day. So you, right at your doorstep, you can actually have the biggest impact in having people's mind changed. And you could see the positive vibes, like a gulf over the neighborhood, which was amazing.
And for the little story, we then went with the neighbors to the waste disposal of the city, and we took it back. And we found a loophole in the law where you can actually have on the public space, cannot have a trailer for more than 24 hours, but you can have a hand cart. And so we turned the old trailer into a hand cart. And with that, we put the citizen garden on top of it. And with neighbors, we went to the waste disposal and we basically walked through the city, like a bit like a procession.
Yes.
And that's beautiful. That was really like such a strong message and statement. And I guess why we are talking about this is like, what does it have to do with DAOs, right?
Yeah.
To go back to that topic. Well, to us, like what's really important for the climate emergency is, we talk a lot about system change, not climate change. We've been going way too far into a system of individualism, individual freedom, and where we start having everyone our own garden, our own car, our own garage, our own trampoline, our own everything. Success in this current system is basically not having anymore to rely on the community. And because of that, well, guess what? We stopped relying on the community, and then the community is basically faded away. And that worked okay, and I guess, for last few hundred years, because the environment around us was kind of basically stable. But now that the world is changing, that we need to adapt, we lost our ability to change. We lost our ability to adapt to the new reality. And for that, what we really need is actually rebuilding communities, because community is immunity. And that's true at the local level, but also at the global level. And DAOs are basically, right now it starts in the online world that of course knows no borders. That's why we have those DAOs that are based on topics that are kind of borderless. But the key here, and that's why I am very excited about DAOs, is that until now, communities were not sustainable because community work was not rewarded. The only way you could be paid to do work for the community is basically being paid by the government, right? And that's very highly limited because those governments, they are top-down institutions. So they have to have this one-size-fits-all administration. And then there is a lot of paperwork, a lot of reporting. And they cannot possibly know what is needed in your community, what is needed in your neighborhood. And so the question becomes for us as we talk about system change, but climate change, okay, how do we move away from a world based on top-down hierarchies, one size fits all? I know better what needs to happen down, the hierarchy, to a bottom-up system where everyone is organized, self-organized as communities, as network. But then how do we make those networks sustainable? How do we enable every community to have their own economy? And that's exactly where DAOs come into place, because DAOs is basically in the same way that the internet enabled communities to have their own communication channel, their own media, which before only governments could do or big corporations could do, right, to have their TV channel or newspaper. The internet, blogging enabled all communities to start having their own media. This new Web3 is enabling all of those communities now to also have their own economy. And that is a profound change because now it means that communities have a built-in ability to reward contributions to the community.
Yeah, for DAOs for sure, but I think it's indeed in the key to successful communities is that people get rewarded for the work they do to make them sustainable. We can use these DAOs and cryptocurrencies and maybe, create our own mini economies in these systems. But before that, of course, starting at your doorstep and building the community and having people have the experience of how important it is to be able to rely on your neighbors is the first step, right? To make this tiny shift in their mind, because we come from very far. If you compare, for example, here on the square, there was a neighborhood committee that had asked permission to build the chessboards. They waited for 3 years. It's a very different, before they got approval and permission, to build their chessboards. It's very different. Like we arrived and we put a little garden without asking for permission. And then, of course, you bump into the system, but just the idea of not asking for permission there anymore and just doing, then afterwards we created a series of play streets with the neighbors where we blocked the streets. Then when we did the citizen bike garden, another project. So we stopped really asking for permission. And then the next step, like when we could rely on a community and when we had our network in the neighborhood where we were super new, we then occupied a building at the corner of our street, the Citizen Corner, but the community was already in place. So it takes a bit of time, like maybe 2 years, with the lockdown, maybe 2 years, to first build a network of people that want to help and that feel the value of, hey, it's super cool to actually reach out to each other and to have projects together here locally. And we start slowly shifting towards like, hey, what would it be like if you could work for this, right? If you could get paid for the community work that you do instead of having to go back to your institutions, because that's what we see all the time. People want change and they go marching for the climate, for example, in the weekend, or they go get arrested. And then on Monday, they are back working for their institution because they don't have an alternative. So that's the real system change that we're talking about, right? How can you get rewarded for community work? Yeah, but it's also like those DAOs, I think a very important thing, it's a global network, and some of the DAOs will be completely online, like Offer Climate. That's a DAO that is a global network, very much online, but all DAOs should very much aim towards very, very local action and people meeting in real life in their own neighborhoods and in their own communities. It's good to meet online, but the real action needs to happen on the ground as well. It needs to be very, very balanced. And it's something to keep in mind, to my opinion, to stay very local and grounded in your neighborhood as well.
It's a way to be connected with reality, right? At the end of the day, in the universe, there is 2 levels, bits and atoms, right? The atoms is what we are made of. It's very local. It's basically, your city where you actually live in a radius of, I don't know, 20 miles, 30 kilometers. And then there is bits, and this is information. And for bits, there is no borders, right? There is maybe just time zones, and those are the global communities. So we need, as a generation, and to tackle this system change that we need to do, we need to think about coordinating at the global level with bits and blockchains. That's exactly the technology we need to coordinate. Mm-hmm. But we need to coordinate for what? And the what is actually doing something in real life, because if you're only gonna do things in the metaverse, this is gonna be a bit of a dystopian future. This metaverse have to be of service to build this solar punk future that we want in real life.
Yes, yeah, to be able to breathe the clean air and to knock on your neighbor's door and to share meals together in a healthy way where kids can play freely and take this space again and feel ownership over their street and over their city. That's where we need to go to. It's very much about responsibility. Like if you give away ownership of your city to a government, you also say like they are responsible, and we need to change that. Taking ownership also bears a lot of responsibility over, hey, I live here, I want to make life better here for my kids, for next generations also. And is putting a car everywhere in my street and flying, is that the best way we can live together? And questioning that, it's really taking responsibility over that question.
Yeah, well said. Like there's so much focus on the virtual these days, and like I feel like most DAOs are doing something in the metaverse, like either NFTs or like, I don't know, so many random things, and it's like everybody's talking about coordination, but yeah, like what are we coordinating towards?
Mm-hmm. And that's great. That's where it starts. It's like when you learn to fly, you first go through a simulator, right? So it feels right now we are in the simulator phase where we play in this metaverse, and that's good. That's a safe space to go and experiment. But once we've learned, how to coordinate, now it's time to apply that to the real life. So in many ways, to me, like this metaverse feels a bit like
testing grounds.
Yeah, it's a testing ground, absolutely. It's a sandbox, and it's also a place for our generation we are a bit like a government in exile. We hear the IPCC report, we see that we need to change, and we see previous generations that are clinging to their position of power in all of those public or private institutions, on all of those boards. And despite what they say, despite what we shout in the street, nothing is really changing, only patches here and there on a broken Windows 95 operating system. And there is no way to keep fighting that. Like we need to basically get out, go where there is no limit, where we can actually unleash our energy, not to be against something, but to be building, offer an alternative. And once we are ready, once we've been through this simulator enough and learn all the ways we can coordinate more efficiently, the government in exile will come back to our cities and share that learning and share a new way to think about coordination without having to rely on 19th, 20th century institutions that have been built and engineered and coordinated using the technology of paper. And that is bureaucratic, it's not open source at all, it's not transparent at all. I mean, it's so obvious that we can do so much better, but we won't get there by telling them you need to change. We cannot change people. We're gonna get there because first we're gonna use our energy and we're gonna apply and simulate that in the metaverse. And then once we feel ready, we will actually offer that as ways to not only coordinate people in the realm of bits, but also start coordinating people in the realm of atoms. And that's what we've seen actually. To me, like DAOs are kind of digital cooperatives, right? And so it's cooperatives 2.0. So we are not inventing anything, but cooperatives are basically totally underrated to me. But DAOs are going to bring them to the future, like by bringing them into a world where it's much more flexible, open, and so on. And so I'm really excited about how are we going to use this new way. These DAOs are going to take over the world, are going to upgrade our institutions, our private and public institutions, the same way that corporations have taken over the world at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution.
And I totally agree that indeed maybe those DAOs and what is being built there is a government in exile, but I totally agree, but I want to add something, and that it's super important that people that are building that new government, new coordination system right now, that they know very, very well what community life on the ground is about. Because otherwise you're going to build something that is very detached from real life, right? So it's really about the balance. It's super, super important to be your 2 feet also in the community, in your local area or in your local group, or it doesn't have to be your neighborhood. It can be any community that you're part of, and also start practicing with new coordination techniques that maybe don't involve technology, but that are also super important, like sociocracy, like deep democracy or liberating structures, and trying to implement already those very democratic way of having conversations together. And then the transition to this new world and new coordination system that is being built in those DAOs will go easier. So we need to take those voices of neighbors that are not in the technological space right now, of people. We need to listen to them as well. We need to build for and with them as well.
Yeah, we cannot lose track. We need to stay connected to reality. Yes. And maybe just because you mentioned a couple of names that maybe for the listeners, this might be the first time they hear them. So Sociocracy is this idea of organizing a group of people where without a hierarchy, where basically people don't have to participate in all decisions. They can, but they also don't need to necessarily agree. They just need to give their consent. So it's really about unleashing the energy in a community.
In a way, in DAOs, like the experience that I have now in a couple of DAOs that I'm part of, is that you don't have to ask permission to start acting on something. Experimenting is free. Like you can start experimenting and you ask for advice, 2-3 people, like, hey, what do you think? Do you want to help me? And then you just go, and you have very short feedback loops, right? So you don't need permission. Like in the government, you don't need permission of the whole, all the politicians that are being elected. No, you can, like the citizen garden a little bit, you test it and see if the neighborhood likes it. And like the citizen bike garden, that other project we built, we got immediate feedback from the neighborhood. Hey, this is too big. Okay, let's try to make it a little bit smaller, right? So this completely other way of ruling and of making things happen, not asking for permission and getting small feedback loops. And then it's not about compromise or not about permission, but about consent. Like, are we okay that you will start this experiment? And then you just go. And it speeds up the action and the learning process so much.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. It's about right now, our society has been designed to basically have this very controlled environment within which is actually really hard to experiment, which actually is a good, very system to keep everything stable. Mm-hmm. But it's not really good at all for a system that has to change, that has to adapt. So the best way to adapt, as nature has shown us, is to run millions of experiments and see what sticks. Right? So the question becomes for us, as we need to find the system change, not climate change. Okay, how many experiments can we run at the global level, at the local level? And how can we shorten the feedback loop so that we have feedback and we can learn, and then we can tweak it and iterate, rinse, repeat. The shorter that loop is, the more experiment, the faster we'll be able to learn, the more likely we're going to find ways to organize ourselves that is aligned with the universe, aligned with what the world needs, aligned with nature, and so on. That's where sociocracy, and that's what we also see happening in DAOs, is coming together, because we don't want anymore those hierarchies. We want anyone in the community to be able to take decisions, right? But it has to follow kind of an advice-seeking process where people have to ask 2-3 people at least, people who are expert in the field and people who are going to be impacted. That's this whole idea of advice-seeking process. And then the default is yes. That's where the idea of don't ask for permission is. It's not that, of course, you need to ask for permission from the people who are going to be impacted, but you don't need to ask permission from some institution that don't live in your street or in a network, in a DAO. Like, there is no such thing as a hierarchy. So you only need the permission of the people who are going to be impacted directly by it and ask for some advice. and then you just go.
In the complex and chaotic society where we live right now, the only way to navigate in a successful way is doing is the new thinking, right? We have to do an experiment to successfully navigate the chaos we are living in. And society is super complex. It's the biodiversity of people living here is incredible, but trying to control and gather all information, it's impossible. It's a waste of time. So yeah, doing is the new thinking.
It's the best way to learn anyway. Like you only learn once you start doing, right? You can, and of course we've been raised in this education system where we are being told and we read the theory and we learn, but we rarely get to practice. It is only once you start doing that you really start understanding.
And stop being scared of failing. There is no failing in experiments. No, actually, you learn the most from failing. And in our educational system, everybody is punished for failing, right? There's the red pen that punishes you immediately when you make a mistake, whereas the learning starts where you fail.
And so all of that take us back to DAO Brussels and All for Climate, because basically with our experience with climate movements, so we've been participating a lot, helping organize different activities, actions. And one thing that kind of struck us is that all of those movements for climate are pushing for a more sustainable world, but they are not sustainable themselves. People burn out, people are not being paid for doing activism. Yeah, they need to do that over their hours, and so just not sustainable. You know, there is no such thing as a perpetual movement in the universe. So maybe what we need is not yet another climate movement. What we need is a climate organism that's going to be able to spread like an organism, that's going to be decentralized, and that's going to be sustainable, and that's going to start offering an alternative to people. Because we cannot continue to just tell other people, hey, stop flying, stop buying SUVs, stop doing this, do that. Like, at the end of the day, if we don't offer them an alternative, most of them are not going to be able to change, even if they want to, right? So as long as people still need to sell plastic to be able to make a living, people are going to continue, right? We live in a way in this state of wage slavery, where even though our soul and our bodies and our values tell us that we should be much more sustainable and stuff, but we cannot help. We still need to work for those old institutions because we need to make a living.
But in a way, like All for Climate started from us reflecting on what can we contribute that feels right for us. And for me at the time, being part of Extinction Rebellion and loving the transition that Extinction Rebellion forced me to make as a person, at some point, it didn't feel right for me anymore to keep on yelling at the government. So All for Climate, I think for both of us, really started from what can we do? How can we make ourselves useful in this climate emergency, in this movement? And then we started All for Climate 2 years ago. We started a nonprofit because we saw that a lot of grassroots movements around us, Extinction Rebellion, Fridays for Future, and then a lot of other local projects, they had to go through the same pain of, hey, how do we open up a bank account? Do we start a nonprofit? So we thought, like, why do we not start one legal entity, a nonprofit, a legal structure that other grassroots movements can use as a vehicle, as a common? So that's what we started 2 years ago. And then now, of course, with the DAO movement, for us, feels very natural to transition All for Climate from this a bit old school structure, because nonprofits are, like, they require a lot of old school thinking, 20th century thinking. And why don't we transition All for Climate into being a DAO? And All for Climate has always been a bridge between those grassroots collectives and grassroots citizens and more the foundations, thinking, for example, the European Climate Foundations. So what we would do is bridge the funds For example, if a grassroots collective wanted to apply for funds in the European Climate Foundation, we would help to get these funds aboard. And then via the Open Collective platform, we can work on transparent donations and transparent bookkeeping and paying the expenses, etc. So the spending of the money and the getting the money in is super transparent thanks to the Open Collective. And it's also a great and very useful tool. And now in the DAO structure, we feel like we're making a bridge to this DAO world, this Web3 world, where all these new coordination mechanisms are being invented, new token economics, etc. And how can we build the bridge now between that and grassroots climate movements, in which we feel that a lot of activists say no because blockchain is bad for the climate. So we feel that we are changing a little bit our perspective, but always bridging. All for Climate is always bridging worlds. For some reason, that's where we find ourselves best, in bridging worlds.
Yeah, so we follow the idea really is how can we help all of those climate initiatives? Because through those actions, they're actually, in many ways, excuses to bring people together, right? People who share the same concerns. And so they do those different actions. And even though we may criticize about the usefulness or not of those actions, I think it's actually beyond the point, because it's the process of working together, learning sociocracy, in doing so, making new friends, rebuilding community. So the first step for All for Climate was, okay, what do all of those initiatives and movements have in common, and what is a shared pain? And let's start there. And that's where, as Leen just explained, we started with creating this new fiscal sponsor. And the next step is, okay, now how can we bring all of those movements, all of those new working groups, local communities to the DAO space? Because we want them to be sustainable. And that's exciting. We are still learning a ton. By no means we have figured it out yet, but you can tell that there is something there. Mm-hmm. You can tell that this feels right, that this is the way things need to go.
Yeah, if you look at Extinction Rebellion, for example, and the effort and the care they put into how do we organize, how can we do this better, how can we not repeat the patterns that are in our capitalist society, all the time they are reflecting on how can we reorganize ourselves in a good way. The only thing that they haven't solved yet is how can we reward people for the work? How can we not rely anymore on the governments, on people to fund us? And I think the solution for that can be found in Web3 and in DAOs, because the organizing, they do the same. Extinction Rebellion is a DAO. They're reflecting on that all the time, reorganizing. Just the reward system and the mini economics there, they haven't figured out. So I think with All for Climate DAO, we can be a bridge for that and bring them maybe that solution and rethink being rewarded for community work so that they can be sustainable as well. Because activism is a public good. What they give to the world is you can almost not put a value on that. It's amazing. We need those no voices so much. So we can only do so much as nurture them, help them, support them. Their voice is extremely important to make the system change we need to prevent further climate change.
And that's why I think like this world of activists have so much to learn from the world of DAOs when it comes to creating new economies, and vice versa. Yes. The world of DAOs has a lot to learn from this world of activists that have practiced sociocracy, that have practiced liberating structures. And maybe you can actually talk about this concept of liberating structures.
Yeah, sure. So liberating structures and then my specialty is deep democracy, but they are they're very similar. So they are both a mindset and a tool set to implement new ways of making conversation in groups, right? So what they do is they try to break the patterns where we see that some people speak more than others. So they try to balance voices and mine the collective intelligence. And especially for deep democracy, what it does is that as a facilitator, you listen deeply to that one voice that says no. And the wisdom of that no voice is going to be added to the end result. So instead of always working with a majority and minority, and we step into that trap very, very often, where we hear like, the majority of the people is going that way, and then we lose the minority. Okay, sorry, you lost this vote, right? That's what we are used to in our present day democracy. But instead of that, you're going to listen deeply to the no voice and add the wisdom of that no voice to the majority vote, so that those people feel heard as well and feel included in the end decision. And the tools in deep democracy and liberating structures all work towards that. They are super hands-on. It can be as small as going into breakout groups, or can be very small interactions, bringing interactions into the group so that voices are more balanced, and that we break old conversation patterns, and that we are all more aware of the importance of every voice. In Sociocracy, for example, you have this concept of artful participation. And that is very important in the way because it's not only the responsibility of the facilitator to make sure that everybody speaks, it's also very important that there's a brave space where people dare to take responsibility to express what they feel, what they think into the group. It's super important to create a safe and a brave space where everything that needs to be said can be said. And that concept is called artful participation. How can I be my best self today in this group? What am I sensing? What am I feeling? What am I thinking? And how can I express that so that it adds to the value of the group, the value of the conversation, and the outcome? It's super important. It's everybody's responsibility to nurture these environments and to take every voice within the consent and the end decision. It's new ways of talking to each other. And liberating structures and deep democracy are tool sets to make that happen in groups.
And that's exciting because we basically moving away from an old world that was basically made of all of those institutions. And because there were hierarchies, they only had, for the most part, only two eyes, right, of the people on the top. And they will dictate the different responsibilities down the chain and the job descriptions. And you will just be basically a pawn, like in that structure.
Or a terrorist, huh? And because you feel not heard and you say like, hey, I'm going to block the streets now.
Yeah. Oh, I'm out of here.
Yeah. Or I'm out. Quit. Or burn out.
Or you burn out.
Yeah.
And so now with those new organizations that actively use those new tools, and they really try to mint the collective intelligence. It's like new organisms that all of a sudden have many, many more senses, because there is not anymore, a rigid structure. It's actually, a 360 degrees animal with senses and eyes everywhere, because every member of the community has equal opportunities to speak up, be heard, share their perspective, and influence the decision of the group. You don't anymore have this majority-minority, because there is no point. Like every single signal might be of importance. We talk a lot.
Yes, sorry.
Forget what I was going to ask before that. But moving away from hierarchies, but then getting stuck in this democracy, like majority winning, making all the decisions, it's still definitely not good. Oh yeah, I wanted to ask, what's the difference between sociocracy and holacracy?
Oof.
Good question.
That's a good question. We're familiar with both of them, but then, I couldn't answer the question, what is the difference, for example, between deep democracy and liberating structures, and deep democracy and sociocracy and holacracy? They are all looking and researching in the same space of reorganizing and having more voices for it. Sociocracy has a very efficient, it focuses a lot on being efficient as well in an organization, but what the differences are exactly, I don't know.
It feels like Holacracy, but we need to double check, but as more like a rigid structure to make sure that a set of rules.
With the circles?
Yeah, with the circle and
stuff.
But
in sociocracy, that is also...
I don't know. Anyway, the point is, I think they're all heading in the same direction, which is good. Different names. I think it's like different JavaScript frameworks. They may have different opinionated, design decisions, but they're all going in the same direction, which is moving away from hierarchies, How do we create those institutions that are acting more like living cells, like organism, where everyone has the opportunity to take initiatives?
But you also feel like there's a lot of these theories and a lot of these new ways of organizing growing. You will also have, for example, a very big community around nonviolent communication. Like it's all rising. It's very much in the air, and it comes with this whole idea that we're not separate from the universe. We are actually the universe. It's this whole quantum thinking of being aligned, right? And all these theories, of course, evolve with that, with this new awareness of what human beings are in the universe and how aligned we are. And it's only the West that is discovering those, right? Because you feel in the East or in indigenous cultures, this way of organizing and mining collective intelligence is ancient, right? We are just discovering that now, and coming up with all these fancy words like sociocracy and holacracy. But for the West, it's very new. For indigenous cultures, this is old school ways of organizing. Huh? It also has a lot to do with cutting out female voices in the West. Big deal, huh? So women very much more sense the group and are very much more present in the group. They are very sensitive to feelings and group dynamics. And we've cut them out for centuries in the West, right? So we're only catching up where male and female can be very much partners in trying to manage groups and manage organizations and not having only dominant male voices in the space anymore.
And that's why in DAOs, it's really important that we pay attention to that gender balance, because we cannot repeat the mistakes of the past. We cannot, we don't want the future to be built, by a monoculture, basically, that will not fit the reality on the ground. So it will be disconnected. Actually, it won't fly away. It won't thrive. So how do we also make sure, how do we create a more inclusive space and welcome really everyone so that everyone get to shape this future? So there's this All for Climate DAO, which is all about bringing together all activists around the world and sharing a common infrastructure to help them learn about Web3 and leverage that. Next to that, we are also, part of DAO Brussels, which is this idea of, okay, what do we do locally? Because we need to also have one foot in the local space, where in the reality. And DAO Brussels is basically about, a city is a DAO. They may just not know it yet. Mm-hmm. But it's also a decentralized, autonomous organization. And the best way to learn is to do, we thought, hey, let's bring together the crypto community of Brussels and let's start a DAO together. That's how we're going to learn. And then that's how also we're going to organize events and hackathons and meetups and projects, you name it. And those are, again, excuses to bring people together. And also we try to make sure that, we create an inclusive space and we create a bridge so that local citizens can come and have a place where they can meet people and understand beyond the smoke screen in the media, on social media, that, gives you like kind of a quick judgment about the crypto space as being this or that. Mm-hmm. If you can actually talk to someone in your neighborhood about it, it totally changes your perspective. Mm-hmm. And so how can we create in all our cities DAOs to coordinate the efforts of citizens to create those new citizen corners in every neighborhood where people will be able to learn about those new coordination mechanisms?
But it also goes like, if we are moving away from nation states, we still need some kind of a local community concept, right? And I think cities will replace that, a DAO Brussels. And then because people are multi-layered in their identity anyway, you will find people that are part of DAO Brussels, and then and then some online communities, but maybe also of the vegan community in the city, or the biking community in the city, or, any community that is out there and wants to define him or herself, maybe a queer community, or I don't know, right? So, and I love how these DAOs actually enable people to embrace these multi-layered identities and to be part of all these different communities and contribute to one or another. Like this nation state has this weird identity thing going on that we are moving away from massively, right? And I think DAOs or communities, right? We call it DAOs now, but communities will enable people to embrace that multi-layered identity feeling that we all have.
And that new paradigm, what's interesting is that you as a citizen, not only are invited to join those different communities, but you are also invited to contribute to those communities because you will be rewarded.
Yes.
And that's a massive key difference, because until now, basically the only way to be rewarded was to basically contribute to the GDP of your country, right? To produce, grow, advertisement, trying to sell stuff, right? And so we were basically just citizens, were just consumers. They were slaves working in factories or in office spaces, working for a limited number of shareholders, right? Who were taking decisions based on PowerPoints and spreadsheets that could affect people locally where they actually don't live, right? So there was a massive disconnection there. And then you will work in those places, in those institutions. And then the only thing you could do, you would be getting money, and then you will be able to spend that money as a consumer. And then if you don't like the way this public space is managed, you get to vote once every 5 years or so. And in between, you can just complain about it with the hope that a politician will hear you and do something about it. That was pretty much, it's not black or white, but that was pretty much kind of the 20th century. And so now, once you give communities the ability to create their own economy and reward community work, well, citizens all of a sudden are not just consumers anymore. They're not defined anymore by what they consume, what they buy. They are defined by the communities where they contribute. The citizen as a contributor. And this is the new era we are entering. As we urgently need to accelerate this system change, not climate change, the question becomes, how quickly can we enable communities all around us, the community of our neighborhood, the community of our city, the community of bikers in our cities, of vegan people, whatever, you name them. How can we enable all of those communities to embrace those tools of Web3 the same way that they embrace the tools of Web 1 and Web 2 to start having their own media, but to now have their own economy, to start rewarding citizens for their contributions so that many more citizens will start checking out of the old economy that only cares about growing the GDP. And more citizens will get to experience this liberation to not have to work anymore for the man, but to start working for the community. And that is such a liberation of energy. You feel so much more aligned.
Yeah, you will contribute to communities and you will feel ownership over that community. And just because you feel that it's yours, you will, the reward, the feeling of satisfaction that comes from contributing to something that you own or that you feel part of is amazing. So, and that will liberate a lot of people, we believe. And then it goes back to where we started actually, right? Working on active citizenship. How can we liberate people? What can we play as a role? Where can we contribute, Xavier and me? What's the intersection? What's our identity? How can we do the inner work on finding where we can contribute, with our identities, to helping other people, to make ourselves useful in this society, to listen to people, to be present, to be very grounded, like what is needed right now? How can I be useful? And how can I help people to become active and take back ownership of their street, of their community? I think that's where we find ourselves now. And on a global level, that is with All for Climate, building a global movement for the climate to enable local action. And on a very local level, we do the Citizen Corner, DAO Brussels. And we make sure that our kids can play in the street.
So, and maybe as a conclusion, like we really would like to invite all of you to be a bridge. If you listen to this, it's because you know about Web3. So you already know more than most people in your neighborhood. So the question becomes, how can you be a bridge to help the activists in your city, the communities in your city, to upgrade, to become sustainable communities that can start rewarding citizens for their contribution? so that you will accelerate the transition away from an extractive economy and towards a much more regenerative economy that will take care of the community members.
Beautiful. The age of empowerment. Yeah, it feels like things really are changing. Like there's a, first of all, people are all ready for this change, but there's, yeah, on the technological side, all these tools for people to coordinate in new ways, but also like social technologies, and yeah, transitioning from the receiving orders and asking and shouting to, yeah, being empowered to just act and do what you think should be done.
Yes, so one of the concrete things that we are doing right now is we are working with Gitcoin that is doing every 3 months a quadratic funding round. And it's all about supporting public goods. They started with digital public goods, right? So all of those open source communities that create software for everyone to use. And now they started doing a category for the climate emergency. So we are working with them on that. The first one was in December. We onboarded 29 different projects around the world, and together they raised $700,000. And now there is another one coming up this March, and it's basically going to be every 3 months. And so if you are involved in any climate community, or if you are doing a project using Web3 or not, but that is about rebuilding local communities, creating a more sustainable world, please apply. You can create your project there. You'll find more information on All for Climate. You can join our Discord. I guess it will be in the show notes. So that I think like what better way to welcome those communities who want to build a better future, more sustainable future. What better way to welcome them to the Web3 community than by giving them money, some cryptocurrency, right? And so that's kind of also the goal here of this Gitcoin climate round.
Beautiful.
I wanted to add maybe one thought or one note. Like there is a massive emergency, a climate emergency breathing in our neck. But I think it would be a mistake to repeat the patterns of capitalism of acting, speed, go, because that is exactly what runs us in a burnout. So I think the fastest way to accelerate the system change is to actually slow down and take a minute. Why are we working together? What is our goal? What is around us? What is right here, right now needed to make a tiny change today? And do that. Start with that. I wanted to add that doing is the new thinking does not mean that you have to, that you just have to start acting here and there and without consciousness or without thinking about the here and the now.
Speed is useless if you go in the wrong direction.
Yeah. So we're not advocating at all for just reckless action or doing without thinking, right?
So maybe actually on that, like Leen is going next in 2 days to Vipassana, and I just came back from it 2 weeks ago. So if you're not familiar, it's a 10-day meditation retreat in silence. There are centers everywhere around the world. You can look it up, Vipassana on Google. And it's growing like crazy. And to me, I did it first 7 years ago when I was still in California. And it changed my life, really, as an entrepreneur, being in that rat race of trying all the time to convince people. And this speed, recklessness, trying to get more, always looking for the next thing. And then being able to slow down, like for 10 days, disconnect, no screens, and everything around you is giving you the opportunity, creating the right environment for you to learn how to meditate, to reconnect with your body, to realize that what is outside is also inside, to realize that you are not only this ego that you have, this little voice that you have in your head, that spirit basically, is not something that is outside of you or that you cannot control, but it's something that you can tame, that you can learn from, that you can observe. And it is very powerful. It's something that we definitely didn't have in our education in Europe and in the Western world in general. And it's mind-opening, like no pun intended here.
Yes, yeah, no. I'm looking forward to slow down and in order to accelerate.
Yeah, slow down to better know, better identify where is it that you can contribute the most? Where is your ikigai? And then go do that. And that's where the universe will conspire to help you be successful, because this is what you were meant to be doing all along.
And make others successful as well. We all have to be as successful as possible in our attempt to prevent further climate change. So yeah, there's no competition here. We really need to help each other to be as successful as possible.
There's no point in being successful in a dying world,
no.
Right? So we would be happy because we live in local communities that are thriving, because we can go out of your door, walk to a nice coffee shop without fearing of having, security, violence issues. You will see along your way other smiling faces, other people that are happy. And this is what happiness is all about. It's a common shared resource that we need to nurture. And so let's do that. Let's think more about our communities. Let's also maybe look more towards the East, less towards the West. Less, I think, like we are, changing the system. And with that, we are also changing kind of the North Star. The North Star is not anymore individual success, the story of the American dream of having your...
Yeah, it's or you are successful or you, this company or that company. No, we have to be all, there's no such thing as competition. Stop convincing.
It's not a zero-sum game. And so we can
help each other
and do that together. So and the future is bright. Let's get out of that doom and gloom, vision with the climate emergency that everything is going to collapse and stuff. The old ways of doing things, the old institutions may very well collapse. That's right. But this is an incredible new opportunity to create a new civilization, new institutions that's going to bring people together, that's going to liberate the energy of people, free them from those cages, from those boxes that are owned by a very limited number of people. Make them co-owners, make them co-creators. There's going to be a beautiful future, and it's up to us to shape it.
Well said. Thank you for the inspiring talk. This was awesome.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. You're welcome.
Is there anything else I can help you with?
There's one question actually that I try to ask every guest, which is that if you had one advice to give to metagame, what would it be?
The first thing is also, if you want to move away from this top-down way of looking at the world where there are experts that know better, well, actually, the first step to contribute is to be immersed in the community and see for yourself what are, the places where you can contribute, where you can make things a little better. So who are we coming from the kind of the outside without being immersed in the community first, having spent enough time to get to know all the different people in the community to tell you to do things this way or that way. It's hard for me to say something unless you have a specific questions about something that you are having an issue with, that maybe we can relate because maybe we had the same experience with other communities we've been involved with, in which case there is learning that can happen between our different experiences. But it's so important to share advice, to share experiences, actually. To speak the truth, it has to come from a place where people have experienced it themselves.
Yeah, good point. And you already gave plenty of wisdom in this episode that can be applied to metagame already. So thank you again. And I will see you around.
Okay, thank
Fantastic.
you.
Well, and best of luck. Keep up the work of doing the right thing, of building this community. It's learning that skill, that muscle. How do we build community? How do we sustain it? it's a learning process, and so it's exciting to see people like you and many others who are trying. It's all about trying. So thank you. Keep it up.
Thank you. You too.
All right. Take care.
Yeah.
See you. Bye bye. Have a great day. See you.